I thought I'd chat a bit this morning about a changing world that we're all facing in, and the degree to which apprenticeships and work-based learning, we think, are one of the key policy drivers in helping Scotland respond to that changing world. And in doing that, I was drawn to Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England's speech to Liverpool John Moores University, and particularly to the first opening statements in that speech, which are really apposite for today. And he started off that speech back on December the 5th with the lines that go something like the following: "Real incomes falling for a decade, the legacy of a searing financial crisis weighing on confidence and growth, the very nature of work disrupted by a technological revolution. This was the middle of the 19th century. Liverpool was in the midst of a golden age. Its custom house was the National Exchequer's biggest source of revenue, and Karl Marx was scribbling in the British Library, warning of a spectre haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. We meet today during the first lost decade since the 1860s, in the wake of a global financial crisis, and in the midst of a technological revolution that is once again changing the nature of work. Substitute Northern Rock for Over-End Gurney, Uber and machine learning for the spinning jenny and the steam engine, and Twitter for the telegraph, and you have the dynamics that echo those of 150 years ago." So to some degree, we've been here before, and we should take some optimism from that, but that shouldn't lead us to any sense of complacency, because in that speech, Mark Carney went on to talk about not just the rapid cycle of technological change, but some major fundamental underpinnings that affected the nature of global economics. And the first was around the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, and secondly then, I guess, the developments in China, which resulted in a third of the current global workforce emerging into that workforce over the period 1989 onwards. So literally the growth in trade across the world has been fueled by an additional third of the totality of the workforce entering the labour market in a way that we'd never seen before. And that's all connected at a time to a global trade wherein we have, 3.5 billion, Jim, you'll have the exact stats, but close on 3.5 billion people with access to the internet today. So the ability to trade and intertrade is just phenomenal. So all of those forces are at play. And many of us here today will be familiar with the term Industry 4.0 and the sense that we're now entering a fourth industrial revolution. And it's true to say that in the finality of that speech, Mark Carney went on to say that the fundamental challenge is that alongside its great benefits, every technological revolution mercilessly destroys jobs and livelihoods and therefore identities well before new ones emerge. And that's some of what we're trying to do today and in the future, which is make sense of how should we invest to respond to those changes in a way that we can leverage the best of the advantages and mitigate against the threats. The World Economic Forum are much more pessimistic, and they go on to say that the fourth industrial revolution, combined with other socioeconomic and demographic changes, will transform labour markets in the next 5 years, leading to a net loss of over 5 million jobs in 15 major developed and emerging economies. And the ILO, at a recent symposium that we held at Strathclyde University, said that after global climate change, that the nature and future of work is the second biggest issue that the world is grappling with at the minute. Now, we've invested a lot of time trying to get behind Industry 4.0 and trying to get behind what are the skill sets that we're going to require in the mid-distance and beyond to thrive in the future. And a lot of what's emerging is a belief around the need for both what's called a T-shaped professional, so both deep technical skills on the vertical but horizontal skills. And those horizontal skills are often referred to as meta skills. And they're skills that are typically not acquired through academic learning or through learning in the classroom, but are typically acquired in the workplace. And in the future, people like the OECD, the International Labour Market Organization, Bertelsmann Foundation, and so on are saying that of 5 or 6 key meta skills, they're looking at things like resilience, entrepreneurship, problem solving, social skills, creativity, manipulating technology, and managing complexity as being critical to the technical skills that we've got, so that we're able to apply and reapply the technical skills that we've got in new settings. And that's led us on to then beginning to think hard about how apprenticeships should change. And so we've looked across the world at countries who appear to be good at this and who have components of both developments in meta skills alongside deep technical skills. And you look at countries like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, where historically they have an embedded work-based learning education system that runs alongside their academic system. And PwC looked at about 43 countries, and they looked at how they assimilate young people into their workforce. And they said if the UK could match the upper quartile of the best performing countries, and they typically are Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, if we could match those, then the UK could add immediately a £45 billion boost to its economy, and that translates in Scotland to about 3.4 billion. So it's a prize that's really worth looking hard at. What is it that we can do in the future that would enable us to compete against some of the best performing countries in the world? But we do have a conundrum in Scotland, and I'm regularly in touch with the Scottish Government, with the Deputy First Minister, and he frets about the investment that he makes in education and post-school skills and the degree to which that's leveraging a competitive advantage for Scotland. And at any point in the economic cycle, we can have upwards of 15 to 20% of our young people disconnected from the labour market. At the same time, we're spending close on £7 billion in education and skills, and yet we read every day of every week about skill shortages, most pronounced at the minute in the area of digital skills, which I know a lot of speakers are going to go on to talk about in the next wee while. So we've put together an action plan which we've recommended to the board of SCDI, which we're recommending to CBI, which we're recommending to FSB, and to any industry or any employer who will listen. And we've got a 5-point action plan that we're trying to hammer home. The first is that it's unconscionable that the recipients or the users of skills are disconnected from the skills system. It has to be the case that employers and industry are driving the skills system and should have a leadership role. And that's typically not the case in the UK and in Scotland. And it's actually very different when you compare it to those countries that outperform us in the PwC Young Workers Index. In the 10 years prior to the economic downturn, so November 2008, when the queues formed outside Northern Rock, everybody perceived that it was the financial crisis that laid weight to the downturn in youth unemployment and the crisis that unfolded. But in the 10 years previous, at the fastest growing period ever in the UK economy, youth employment flatlined. So that rate at which employers were assimilating young people into their businesses in the 10 years prior to the economic downturn pretty much flatlined. And it seems to be in the UK and in Scotland, and it's not always the case. We have islands of excellence, but generally employers believe that skills are in a skills shop, and when you need them, you download them off the shelf, and when you don't need them, you just move them along. As opposed to Switzerland, where they absolutely believe that the future workforce of their industry is critical to the success. And it's a very, very different pitch. But we believe industry and employers need to step up. They need to be facilitated by government. Government needs to move out of the way. And we need to enable industry and employers to adopt a leadership role in shaping the skills of the future. The second action is around taking a longer-term view. It's interesting, maybe in the last 4 or 5 years, when we take examples like Standard Life and Scottish Water as two examples. So about 4 or 5 years ago, in both organisations, upwards of 60 to 70% of their workforce was plus 50. And that process of refueling their workforce with young people had died away. And they ended up with a very long tail of an aging workforce. And they begin to think, well, what are we going to do about it? And I'm thinking, well, what were you thinking that you didn't invest ahead of the curve and plan for the future? And I think we need to be constantly looking ahead and understanding at what rate and at what flow should we be bringing people into our organization, and then how do we upskill and reskill our workforce to make sure that we're competitive in the future. We're keen in Skills Development Scotland to facilitate industry, to look hard at future dynamics, not in the sense that we're going to end up with some kind of post-Soviet, Marshall Plan that absolutely plans everything to death, but that directionally we understand the shifts in where labour markets are going. Secondly, and this seems an obvious thing, but you would expect that as much of the 1.6 billion that goes into FE, HE and apprenticeships every year should be demand-led. But actually it hasn't been. Largely it's institutionally led, and whatever the institutions serve up, that's what's available to the labour market. And often employers don't have a huge influence on what that range of subjects ought to be. And there's great examples, and I won't dwell on them, but classic examples of anywhere up to maybe 200 or 300 people studying forensic science. And in any given 2 or 3 year cycle, we might have openings of 5 or 6 jobs. And you wonder, well, why are we investing so heavily in areas where actually the labour market is not matching up to the future demand? And again, it's not about absolute planning so that every course you study has to be fully aligned to a job. But I think we should have some sensitivity around the labour market infecting the opportunities that are available. And so we have a strong belief that more of the skills system should be demand-led. We've invested heavily working with 17 industry leadership groups, and we've produced over 12 or 13 sector skills investment plans that look at the short, medium and long-term needs of those sectors in the face of a changing global economy. We also think we need to shift the dial. I call this the back to the future strategy. And forgive me if you've heard me quote this before, but in her review for the UK government, Alison Wolfe talked about the changing patterns of young people entering the labour market over the last 50 years. And so if you were born in 1958 and you came out of school in 1976 at the age of 18, then 74% of young people in 1976 went directly into the labour market. Fast forward to today and it's completely inverted. 74 to 76% of young people are taking themselves out of the labour market and directly into FE and HE. And that's not a bad thing. But as we look to the future, and as we look to how fit Scotland is to compete in a changing global economy, and we look at what we understand about those successful countries, then we believe there needs to be a shift back to a work-based approach. And for that reason, we've invested really, really hard in scaling up the modern apprenticeship program from around 9,500 apprenticeships back in 2009-10, up to 26,000 this year, 27,000 next year, rising to 30,000 new starts by 2020. But we haven't been satisfied with that. We've looked hard at how can we expand the program so that we ensure that we protect quality, but that we open more opportunities up for young people. And so we've back-ended the program into S5 and S6. We know there's a big challenge for young people who typically are scarred by their parents who went through the 11+ exams. So Jim's very bright, so we're going to work hard with Jim and he's going to go to university. Damien, you're not so clever, so we'll give you a lump of wood to chisel in the corner and we'll get you on a vocational pathway and you'll be all right, but we're really interested in Jim because actually the system rewards schools for academic outcomes. Get your 5 A's, get your place at university, and that equals a great school. So we looked hard at the choices that young people make in senior phase, and we were really keen that we didn't degrade the apprenticeship program as being just another option. So we wanted to make sure that foundation apprenticeships were leveled at level 6, which is the equivalent to a higher. And so if a young person invests in acquiring a foundation apprenticeship, they get the appropriate academic hires that are aligned to that. And we think it's close to 2 hires in terms of active learning. But the simple idea is, could a young person undertake the first year of an apprenticeship or most of the components of the first year of an apprenticeship during senior phase? And we believe that would offer, as a minimum, a better insight into a career pathway that they might like to choose. So I'm deciding I might like to be an accountant, so I'll do the first year of an apprenticeship as a technical accountant. And as a minimum, I might decide, I tell you what, that was rubbish. I hated it. The office environment was awful, the type of work I was asked to do was awful, and I don't think I'll thrive in that type of environment. Well, that alone would be a great outcome because it would ensure that young people make more informed choices post S6. But what if I really, really enjoyed it? Then immediately I can convert my tariff into hires for access to university or college, or I get accelerated entry into year 2 of the apprenticeship program. And you've got really innovative companies like Campbell Dallas. Some of the big 5 accountancy firms are now recruiting directly from school. And rather than waiting the 4 years to get somebody from university and then spending 2 years right-sizing them so that they understand the workplace. They're taking them in at 17, 18 and taking them through a technical apprenticeship and into degree level after that. And so other choices that young people make, if you're going to university, a classic one is engineering. So Jim's got his maths, physics and English A's. I've got my maths, English and physics. I've got my A's. And then Jim's thinking, how am I going to get 3 more A's? Because it's really tough to get into Strathclyde to study engineering. So he's going to do music and drama and whatever's the least line of resistance to get an A, to get me the academic tariff. And I'm going to say, well, actually, I want to show that I'm really interested in engineering. And I'm going to do the first year of an engineering apprenticeship alongside my A in maths and physics and in English. And today, Jim MacDonald will give me accelerated entry into Strathclyde over Jim, because he'll recognize that I've invested in the career pathway. So in that way, what we're trying to do is to show that for those who want to go to an academic route into university, a foundation apprenticeship can support that. But equally, if I want to do a work-based route, I can get the benefits and accelerate into year 2. But as a minimum, at least I get to test the career pathway that I think I'm interested in. I think that's a good minimum start. Additionally, we've introduced graduate apprenticeships for the first time ever this year. And that's simply, again, going back to the future, where a lot of professional apprenticeships were undertaking in a work-based environment where you did block release to college or university and you did your work during the day. And so today, if you go onto the Scottish and Southern website, you can do a graduate apprenticeship. You're paid 17.5 grand and you complete your ordinary degree in 3 years. And it seems like a no-brainer for some people. And the bizarre thing is, if I study full-time at the minute, then the hidden subsidy for every undergraduate is about 8 grand per year. If I'm studying medicine, it's probably 14 or 15. If I'm studying engineering, it's probably 11 or 12. If I study for a degree part-time, I get nada, absolutely nothing. And then if I do a return on investment for a graduate apprenticeship against a traditional full-time student, well, full-time student will take 4 years. Per 1,000, it's 32 million. Average student debt is 10 grand per head. When I finish my degree, I typically have to go onto a graduate program, which means I've got to spend another 2 years before I'm assimilated into the workplace. If I go the graduate apprenticeship route, I'm earning while I'm learning, so I'm typically earning around 17 to 22,000 pounds. I'm contributing around 2.5 grand to the revenues of Scotland. I'm typically got a percentage of my time that's productive. In year 1, it might be 20%. Year 2, it might be 40%. Year 3, it might be 60%. Hey presto, I've got no student debt. And I only say that by way of not making the case that everything should be graduate apprenticeships. But currently, this year, we're spending 76 million pounds on the apprenticeship program, on New Start apprenticeship programs. Every year, there's 1.4 billion spent on FE and HE. And my case is one of balancing. I think more of that expenditure should go towards a work-based proposition. And then the 5th recommendation is around this sense of co-investment. And I guess there's nothing like an employer tax to sharpen the mind. So the introduction of the apprenticeship levy in many respects has now forced this co-investment. So of the funds that are raised in the UK from the apprenticeship levy, around 210 million pounds in 2017-18 will be recovered from employers in Scotland who've got an appropriate size that makes them open to the apprenticeship levy. But typically 210 million pounds will be raised through the apprenticeship levy in Scotland. And I think the message back out to employers is, if you want to recover that tax, then the way to recover it is to invest in work-based pathways. And if you do that, then you'll both invest in your future workforce, but also accrue back the investment that you've been paying indirectly through the apprenticeship levy. So that's pretty much all I have to say this morning. It's a really, really strong plea for, in a global economy, in a world of really dynamic change, we believe that T-shaped professionals will be one of the developments that Scotland needs to invest heavily in. The way to acquire and develop T-shaped professionals is through work-based learning. You develop meta skills on the horizontal along with deep technical skills. You can do that in a way that's incredibly productive, and it starts with a job as opposed to hoping that it finishes up with a job. It requires industry to change practices that have really morphed from maybe the late 40s, 50s to today. We coined that as a Back to the Future strategy, and we'd like to see more of Scotland's employers investing in the apprenticeship programme, but we'd like to see government match up to and support that leadership by ensuring that they get the appropriate space in the skills environment to become leaders, but equally that they get the appropriate support to take that forward. So thanks very much. Claire, thanks for hosting us today. Thanks to Microsoft, and a big thanks to all our guest speakers who are going to speak later on. Thank you.